We're going to talk about scheduling operators, adjusting to changes, scheduling the operators, all to make the expedition a bigger success, make more queues, and go away happy. Because at the end of the day, that is. We have Adrian up here. We'll talk about FT8 SuperFox and how it helped throughput of QSOs. Glenn, who's we figured out has been on 712 DXpeditions and 711, I exaggerate. And Gerry Hall, who did our management and writing up the procedures for the remote ops. So Gerry, take it away.
Okay, so operator and management training. So I was the CW, for the whole operation, but especially on CW, we had 40 remote operators in M5J, and on CW they had that equivalent number on FT8. So you really got to train the guys if you want this to go smoothly. N5J was really complex, and we wanted the remote operators to understand not everything about everything in the operation, but what they needed to know to be able to do their job efficiently. So I did a lot of work with George and the team trying to understand everything about the system. And of course, we know hams. What's their major thing? RTFM. They don't read the manual, you know. So I developed an operating guide which had all the, lots of pictures and information about how to do the audio, our mumble, which was our audio on the operation, how to do remote desktop, the things that would affect bandwidth. So we were using flex radios, and the guys would put up huge spectrum displays, which you don't need on a DXpedition at all, but they love to play with it. What I did was try to pick out a few of the operators out of the team. And, one of the things is how did I determine the team? But I picked very, very good, high performance contest operators. But I took a few of those guys that I knew that were quite technical and tried to train them as key operators. Since we're going 24/7, not everybody's going to be awake all the time, and you need to have people available. So Adrian was one of the guys on the boat. He was kind of the guy you tried to get if you couldn't solve a problem. But the idea was to try and solve problems before it got that far. So we trained key operators on all aspects of the operation. They knew how to do certain things that other operators didn't know, and hopefully that worked. One of the real challenges that I had is we had, foreign operators that English wasn't their native language. We had operators in Japan, we had operators in many Spanish speakers, and so I did some conversion of the manual into their language, so to try to make it easier for them, and that did help a lot. We had an operator in Thailand, all over the place. Most important. This is important for any DXpedition anyway. You always want to try and dry run everything. So we had a few smaller operations from George's boat where we used all the gear. And was it going to work exactly the same it was on the operation? No, but it was 90% of the way there. So most people could learn it, and they did fairly well. Picking operators. A lot of DXpedition operators are chosen because they know somebody. Somebody knows somebody, and they're a good operator. In this case, I knew a lot of people because I'm a very active contest operator. And I said, we have WRTC. That's the guys that are on the top of WRTC are probably pretty good operators. And a lot of them I knew personally anyway. So they were sort of a lot of the people that I picked for the operator. But when you have really high performance single op operators, you have to also look at personalities. If everything has to be their way and perfection, they're not good for a remote DXpedition team. They have to be able to tolerate problems, and there are problems. And they have to understand team. Actually, I looked at guys who were very high performance in multi-op situations. So they're used to working as a team. Because there's no I in team. And on a DXpedition, if you're not a team, it's not going to work. So, well, as they say, single op prima donnas don't apply. I don't care how good you are. If you can't work as a team, they're not going to work. Watch out for operators who know it all. They're good radio operators, but they may not be engineers. But they saw radio set up one way once, and so they believe that's the only way you can use this radio. And in a DXpedition, you have to keep everything consistent. And we did on N5J, we did have some operators that decided that they knew better than anyone else and would change a lot about the radios. And we would lose hours sometimes, hours, getting things set back to the way they were. So you have to watch out for that. If they're not, because we were like on N5J, we're in a U.S. license, we have to operate within operating limits, like spectrum space and band assignments, et cetera. If you get a remote operator, how much time can he commit? The expeditions are 24/7 for a long number of days. So, and we have a schedule, and Don will talk about that. But can the remote op really dedicate the time that he thinks he can dedicate to the operation? Because you don't want to have a time slot come up with no operators.
One of the big things I can't stress enough on operators is we kept telling them, don't move things around the desktop. And it was amazing. A new operator would come on and he says, well, I don't like N1MM in the lower right-hand corner. And you could see people moving things around the screen.
Oh, but it's not me.
Right.
Yeah.
And then they'd leave, and then the next operator would come. I remember because we had control operators on the boat, they couldn't, if they hit the wrong button, to the extent of even closing the flex windows, it needed one of us to go repair it because the guy in France couldn't change things, not being the control op. So that's the kind of reality. And Adrian's going to talk about SuperFox and how it increased our throughput and our rates.
Well, beginning with the version 2.7 and WSJT-X software, a new feature called SuperFox was introduced. It took a lot of testing, and maybe it's still not a perfect 100% with no bug software. Actually, no software is 100% with no bugs. But the idea is that the features introduced by this piece of software really changes the way FT8 works and the way the expeditions work for ham operators. So first of all, the goal of SuperFox is to increase the amount of QSOs made in the same amount of time. So the high rate of the QSOs was one of the goals. So this is achieved basically by increasing the number of streams that the expedition can work at a time. In this case, 9 streams instead of 5 compared to the previous Fox and Hound system. Another advantage, and this is really powerful, is the fact that in the previous version, when you divided the signal to work 5 streams, your power, whatever that was, 500 watt, will divide between each of the streams. So if you do some calculations, with 500 watts and 5 streams, you get less than 100 watt per stream. So now you all will work a lot of stations, but you will work stations that can hear you, which means closer. So rare stations that actually need you will not be able to work you. So with the new SuperFox, that disadvantage disappears because all 9 streams get the full power. It's an incredibly new system and very well designed. Now, another very interesting feature that was added, and this is also one of the reasons it needed the expedition to be introduced is the fact that you can now see if the expedition that you're working is actually the one that you want to work or not some clown pretending to be the expedition. In other words, a lot of people got frustrated. You spend a lot of time and finally you say, wow, I got them in the log. And you say to yourself, well, it's too much work to work them on a second band. And then the expedition goes home, uploads the log, and you realize you did not work to the expedition, but you work as a pirate. And that's really, really disappointing, especially if this is an all-time new one for you. And if it's a rare the expedition, and maybe you'll have to wait another 20 years until they show up in the air again. So anyway you take it, it's a big, big disappointment for the ham radio operators around the world. So the system introduced by SuperFox is pretty simple. The signal has a digital signature. There's no point to get into all kind of details, but the idea is that you can easily go to a website and double check that whoever is on the air right now is actually the expedition that you want to work. This is really an incredible new feature that, especially in FT8, it's hard to figure out if it's a pirate station or not. Why? Well, an SSB is very easy to, guess if the operator behind it is part of the expedition or not. You might identify the voice. In CW, usually a pirate the expedition has a very bad operating CW, and you can tell he's not really a the expedition quality type of operator, so that sometimes it's easy to guess it's a pirate station. But with FT8, it's very easy to be fooled. And so this is an incredible new feature that was added. It did have a bunch of errors, and while we were testing in American Samoa, getting ready for the November 5 Juliet the expedition, which introduced the SuperFox for the first time to the ham operators around the world, we had the chance to test it, and actually we're in touch constantly with the WSJTX development team, and they were able to fix errors and apply patches so that we get ready for the big show in Jarvis Island. One of the interesting things to add is that the expedition to Baker Island not too many years ago, also run and organized by Don, that was the expedition that actually introduced the Fox and Hound feature that was developed by WSJTX. All these features are very difficult to implement and require a lot of smart brains behind it. It's not like some guy sits in a corner and types a few lines of code and you get the software up and running. You require people that actually work in the field with the encryption, people that have experience in writing code, and most importantly, they have to do it for free. There's no any payment or any reward from spending time in developing software. Another thing that makes a lot of people happy is that the SuperFox system cannot be forced into doing robotic QSOs, which we started to see quite a bit lately, where the expedition leaves the computer on, comes back 3 days later, and then looks in the log and say, oh, that's pretty cool, another 10,000 QSOs. Well, SuperFox does not allow that, and that makes it more appreciative, let's say, or more embraced by ham operators. Another thing to mention is that although it took a little while until people learned how to operate or to chase the SuperFox, it's important to remember that although you need the latest version of the software, or at least 2.7, you do transmit, or the DX it transmits the normal FT8 signals. So all in all, this is an ongoing development, and it's a big plus to our hobby, and especially for the times when the solar cycle is dipping and you would need ways to still make QSOs when there's no propagation.
Introducing both Foxhound and Super Fox on D expeditions really required the use of our website, instructing people how to work us. And we had pages on that. And Ned will remember when we were on Baker, we were there for almost a week, and people were still not understanding that we were using a different.
I can't decode them.
Right.
I can't decode
They
them.
couldn't decode us. Something
I need it.
was
I can't
wrong.
decode them.
Right. They couldn't work us because they weren't shifting down as the old as the non-Super Fox version needed it, and it was a source of frustration. And in fact, after the first half of Jarvis, we actually moved a couple of the Super Fox stations to non-Super Fox because people still were calling with the wrong version. So as much as we had websites and DX bulletins and even the packet cluster, you'd see tons of spots. Exactly. It's Super Fox, you need a... But really what was amazing is how people could call us on old versions when the old versions didn't really decode the Super Fox. So how were they calling us not knowing what we were sending? That was one of the real mysteries.
Psychic powers of ham operators.
And then, of course, you see the RR73s coming when you didn't send them a report. And that happens even in non-Super Fox or non-Fox. It's just people throwing out hair melodies. Luckily, the software will not send you, at least the true WSJTX, an RR73 based on an R report if it hasn't sent a report. But whatever. Okay, moving on. Team scheduling. This is going to be a tag team. Glenn's going to talk about old school, and I'm going to talk about how we did it on Jarvis.
I'm a slow learner, and for many DXpeditions, I had a Excel spreadsheet trying to match the operators to their wants. You know, would they want to do more sideband, more CW? Did they want to operate 160? Did they want to operate the high bands? Oh, and sometimes I'd miss a whole sleep cycle trying to do the scheduling for this. And the guys on Wake came up with a very simple aspect. You divide the team into 3 teams. You work 4 hours on, 4 hours off. Then you have 4 hours on again and 8 hours off. Then you're on for 3 hours and 6 hours off. And then you repeat that. The advantage of that is you can get some good sleep. There's a lot of hours to do other things, and it's you know, and there's oftentimes a station or two that's not assigned to the team, but in all these times I've used this schedule, I've never seen a station go unattended. I mean, guys that are off shift, they pitch in, like we talked about in the team building today. You really want to make queues, and so everybody is really trying to fulfill all of the team requirements to make that 100,000 queues or whatever it is. And when the team meets for their shift, they can choose what band, what modes they want to do, so everybody's happy. You know, so it really made things happen. And previously it's like, I don't want to do sideband. I don't want to do CW. I don't want to do RIDI. But this time, everybody has the freedom to choose, and it's very simple, very simple. And sometimes Murphy gets in the way. I was just a few months ago on St. Paul Island, and the other thing is we have the teams are, Team A is in this tent, Team B is in this tent, and Team C is in this tent, and that way when it's time for you to go up, you know, the alarms go off and you go to your schedule, you don't wake up people who are just got to sleep, you know. So we put the teams in separate tents. Well, so at, let's say, 7 a.m., Team B is supposed to show up Nobody showed up. And the reason is, we all had watches and clocks and alarms and things. The lighthouse, some tents were on one side of the lighthouse, some tents were on the other side of the lighthouse. And the time zone between Atlantic Standard Time and Newfoundland Standard Time went right between the lighthouse. And so we were on different times. But the problem is, it wasn't an hour difference. Newfoundland is 30 minutes ahead. So, you start to go your shift, and I got 10 seconds. It'd take me 10 seconds to walk from my tent to the operating tent, but you show up a half hour late. So Murphy gets in the way. I've never seen that before. I probably never will see it again, but that was very interesting. I think.
Okay, so how did we do it on Jarvis? The tents weren't 10 seconds apart. They were 15 time zones apart. And so we came up with a Google spreadsheet, which we had tested as far back as DXing, where people would sign up for slots and then show up for slots or cover them. And because it was interactive, we would know as that within a day ahead of each day that there were unfilled slots. Well, on Jarvis, we took it one step further. We came up with a schedule online that showed band openings, showed which radios operated on which bands. So there was less collision because on DXing and on even KH8, what we found is people didn't know where the local operators would be, and people didn't know what other conflicts with the radios were. So with this schedule that we used, we took all the guesswork out of the operator of being on a certain band at a certain time, because when you're all on the same island, you really know where the other operators are. If you QSY to a band that's in use, you find out within seconds. When you're not in front of the radio, you blow up the receiver if you do that. And so we think with this schedule, people knew what bands were open, at what time, what antennas were on each radio. So if you're on remote 3, you knew that that would only operate FT8 on a certain antenna. And I have to say that on Jarvis, we didn't have two people trying to be on the same band or somebody being on a radio with an antenna that didn't work on that band. We had a couple of slots that weren't filled because people overslept, and by having 5 local operators, when we saw an empty band, one of us would just sit down and operate. So I'd say we had about a 90-odd% utilization rate on the 2 local radios and the 4 remote radios. I guess that's it for that topic. Performance tracking.
Well, we always, every DXpedition I've been on, we always have a whiteboard, and we have the daily queue number. We're going, making good gains and stuff like that. And, and then after a few days, you start to see where the needs are. And the pilots report back to us, more Asia on 160, more Eastern Europe on 10, we'd write that on the board. And so when we would show up for our shift, we'd kind of plan, the propagation is probably going to be to Japan on 160 during the shift, so we'll get on 160 early, and hopefully we'll get some JAs in. And on a rare DXpedition, if you're in the top 10 or 20, to help others get to get their all-time new one, you turn off the leaderboards, because all the big guns are trying to fill in all the band slots, and not let the new guys get their contact. And, we really take advantage of the pilots giving us feedback, because, we want to know what bands are open. I know when I've been in Lac Chedweep and Andaman, in that part of the world, the openings to North America are really short, maybe an hour and a half, and that will take from the beginning to the end across North America. It's like 90 minutes, and the other time of the day it might be 2.5 hours. And so but all the Europeans and Japanese are so much stronger, you don't hear the North Americans unless you're listening for them and know that they might be there. So stand by, let's work North America only. So getting feedback when those openings are, when they start, and of course, when they close, you realize that easy. But, and the other thing is when you're working FT8 as a Fox, you can select the distance. So the decodes show the farthest ones away, which theoretically are the weakest and, that really need us. So that's a help too, to select who you decode on as a Fox. And, we try and get the remote operators all the time they want to. What's next?
Is that it for that? Communications,
Yeah.
which is not you. Oh, no, adapting to change, that is you.
And if you look at our stats on St. Paul a few weeks ago, we were going great guns. We were making 10,000 Qs a day. And then the next day we made 4,000. That's because we went outside at night and watched the northern lights. There just wasn't that propagation. So that, Murphy can do things for propagation too. But with the shift of 4 hours, and 4 hours and 3 hours, you slowly rotate through the gray line, so you get a really good feel by about 4 or 5 days, what the propagation is going to be to work, the areas that are, propagationally challenged. And loss of operators late in the game. Well, that might be for a remote, but
Yeah, that was put in mostly because after about 5 or 6 or a week, the remote operators get bored. When you're all on an island together, if somebody gets bored, somebody drags you by the neck and puts you in front of the radio again. When a station in the middle of Europe or even in the US just says, I've had enough, you just have to adapt. And luckily on Jarvis, we had a couple of Iron Men that if there was an opening, you send them a message. W1UE was a late addition to the game, and he could operate 20 hours a day. And not only on FT8, there was a shift where he ran an FT8 station while running a CW pileup at like 200 stations an hour, and it was like, what? So that is true.
QSO making machine.
Yeah.
anyway, I've seen a few equipment failures. I remember one time I was on 12 meters, this was on Malpelo, flat SWR, and all at once, poof, the amplifier just went up in smoke. No reason for it at all, and wasn't overdriving or anything. On a trip to Lac Chedweep, there were 3 islands that we were distributed among, and one group brought all solid-state amplifiers, and within 36 hours, because of the power grid fluctuations, every one of their amplifiers failed. We had tube amplifiers, and I think that we had a little unstable grid too, but we didn't lose anything. And then the weather can be so bad. It can be so good too. I mean, when it's nice, but when it's rainy and your antennas blow down, I mean, you got to go out, fix them up, prop them up, get something going, just to stay on the air. In the middle of the night, when it's sideways rain, it can be pretty miserable. But that's part of the fun of it. It's an adventure, and it draws the team closer together as a close-knit team. That's sort of like the military guys. When they're in battle, they stay good friends for life. So, I mean, that's one of the, even though some of these bad things happen, I think it's really good for team camaraderie and you know, just memories and things. So you can sit in your armchair at home, you know, whether it's air conditioned or heated, you know, and we're out there suffering in the sideways snow or the sideways rain. But you know, it's you know, we go from plan A, plan C. I've seen plan D, E, and F sometimes too. But we make it work because, you know, our time is limited and the clock is running, the meter is running. I mean, it's you know, many dollars per minute, you know, while you're on the air.
I'm going to finish up with communications. What we learned from the very first remote multi-person DXpedition from French Polynesia is communication is so important. It's always important, but when you have operators in various parts using the same machine, it becomes vital. It becomes vital for changing shifts. It becomes vital for reporting a problem. What happens when the radio hangs up? And the local operators aren't always watching every remote radio. So we use Slack, and we set up channels on Slack, and I think most of you are familiar with Slack, but it's just a great tool. We set up a general op room chat where an operator would come off a shift and say, I don't know who's taking this period tomorrow at this time, but I had the most amazing opening to, you know, to Europe. Or somebody would come on the operator channel and say, my wife's having a baby, can somebody take my shift? Things like that. When you take over the shift, it was always good for the operator leaving to pass some notes to who's coming on. Watch for this part of the world, or I've had on CW somebody jamming us, and be cognizant when the callers stop. We've had people, when they take over a shift, give other non-propagation things. So instead of using a general chat room to talk about these things, the CW team had their chat room for shift changes, and the FT8 guys, so we weren't, we were focusing the information flow. We had a 911 channel. That channel was always being monitored because, like I said, we couldn't monitor the 4 remote radios even though we were in the room with them all the time. So when something went down, and if nobody responded, Adrian and I, everybody had our phones on the local network, so because we had internet, we could get WhatsApp messages. So again, if you wanted to reach a team leader, and it's not like we were on the boat sleeping, I don't know, were we averaging 3 hours a night if we were lucky? Between maintenance and going to the island and watching things move around screens to put back, we were basically there. And then last resort, if we noticed something going on the local machine that needed to get the operator's attention, the remote op, we would just go into Autodesk, which is how they communicated with the on-board PCs, and we would just open up a chat window and literally put it right over N1MM and grab their attention and say, wait, stop, we need to do this. Communications, I can't stress that enough. And when you start dealing with remote, it's sink or swim, and you have to talk to everybody. And since drinks are coming up, and you're all tired, questions? Whoops.
I did that.
You did that.
Hi. Short question for Gerry.
Yep.
Right in the beginning, you talked about getting the team together and looking at expertise or who could be your key people
Yeah.
that you could call on. Question is, how many instances would you say the key people that you selected and designated saved the day?
Or what?
Saved the
Saved the
day.
day.
I mean, how many times?
Saved the day?
Yeah.
Oh, they did.
Pulled it out.
Pulled it out. I mean, one of the things is, we had operators from almost every continent, and they would become cheerleaders for that, right? And you know, it all depended. Some of them had time on their hands, right? They're really good operators, but they had time on their hands. So they would do many shifts. It's like, as we were speaking about W1UE, he was doing mostly FT8, but then he got on CW2 because we had slots to fill. And we had a couple of ops in the west coast of the U.S. here that were just incredible. They were there for many, many. People really, really got into it. And as we looked at the QSO numbers and we were approaching 100,000 and we wanted to make it over there, people just operated. It
I was thinking that they were sort of technically adept people that you know, you had a technical problem and
Yes.
that they pulled it out. That's what I was thinking.
Oh, okay. Yes. That
You're talking
happened,
about your
that
reserve?
happened more than once. Where
Okay.
we couldn't get a hold of anybody on the boat, but there was a problem and they knew how, or we trained them how, and they a lot of times they could fix the issue.
Because a lot of the problems were like N1MM configuration, things like that. If something happened to a radio, there was nothing they could do.
Right.
And then there were times on the boat where we were, you know, out there on the island, all hands down to fix whatever was to fix on the island. That takes priority because you have to go there when the tide is the correct, you know, the right time. You also don't want to do any work during the day when it's incredibly scorching hot. You know, there's no trees, there was no shade whatsoever. And so there are times when there was nobody on the boat to do, you know, tech support. So not that many cases, but, you know, stuff happens on the expedition.
I have a question for Adrian.
Oh, boy.
You were on Jarvis, and you joined us halfway through our expedition in St. Paul. And your tent was right on the lighthouse. What time zone were you in your tent?
Well, I was so excited to operate from there, especially towards the end of the expedition. The propagation was so good, I didn't want to get off that chair, and so I operated a lot more than the shifts were available. So, well, you know, my time was always on East Coast. So,
His time was always on the open band.
yes, okay, that's what I wanted to say.
I have a question for Adrian as well. You made a strong case for SuperFox. What is the thinking behind the policy of limiting use of SuperFox to the really high throughput de-expeditions, and is that position softening, do you know?
That actually was the initial plan, but we've been issuing SuperFox keys to anybody, special event stations. We won't issue it, or have not issued it, to an individual operator operating at home.
But there's almost no other restrictions.
So for a two-operator de-expedition in Cape Verde, like the one I do next.
Sure, ask.
Oh,
him.
absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a perfect example of who gets it. It doesn't have to be 10 operators.
For the on-site operator scheduling, if my math is correct, the 4 on, 4 off, 4, 8, 3, 9, that's like a 29-hour cycle. Did you ever think about doing like a 24-hour cycle so that people would be kind of doing the same shifts? And
Well, we like to, rotate through the gray line. That was the most
okay.
important thing, so we get a feel for the propagation, how it's going. And that's, doing that 4-4-3, it just keeps it simple. Everybody knows when they're going to, when they're assigned to the station, they know when they need to be there. But again, there were 6 stations and 3 people on a team, or maybe 4, but there was never a station that was unattended, ever. So, I mean, the stations were always busy.
I have a question about inclement climates. Did you guys have lightning arresters on all your antennas, or did you unplug them from the radios when the weather got bad, or how did you mitigate possible lightning storms? And
The only time I've seen electrical storms where we needed to maybe unplug things was on Malpelo when we were 1,000, 1,100 feet up, and you could see where all the lightning had hit, all over. And so, that was kind of scary up there. And so we would shut down, as a thunderstorm passed. But I've never really you might have had more experience of that in the Pacific as these storms come through.
We didn't have any thunderstorms on Jarvis, did we?
No, usually the expeditions are scheduled in the time of the year that, it's, you have less storms, because you have to sail there, so you're never going to go. Just like you're never going to go on the expedition in the Caribbean in July or August. So sometimes, you don't have a choice and there are storms, but they're usually not that strong to scare you into seeing the electrical discharges right there where you are.
How, with all operators all over the world, how do you meld all the logs together into one database?
The remote operators all connected to the boat, to the PCs on the boat. So all the logs were on the PCs on the boat. There was no logging done off-site.
How many QSOs?
106,000 on Jarvis with 5 locals, and the 5 of us made 25% of the queues.
And all the SSB QSOs were made
Locally.
on the boat.
Right. And most of the FTA queues were made by the remote ops.
Okay, my question is on hardware reliability. You had brought up the fact of guys bringing out some of the latest and greatest solid-state amps and the failure rates that you had on that. Now, we know that solid-state amps are a whole lot lighter weight and easier to move around, and they have some really nice features built into it, like for networking. So, do you guys trust the solid-state amps anymore, or is that still just a no-go for any of the type of expeditions you guys use?
I can
I
tell you
think
what
things have come a long ways in the last few years, over the last 10, 20 years. The solid-state amps that failed at Lakshadeep, that was, oh dear, time goes too fast, 12, 15 years ago. And on St. Paul, we had PGXLs, and they were powered by 120 volts, and so they put out 600, 700 watts. And, I think the LD Mosses today are much more rugged. Things are built, more rugged than they were from some of the early solid-state amplifiers. And, having one generator per station, you have a pretty stable power supply. If you're connected to an unstable grid, that might be a different story. But
And generally, these LDMOS amplifiers lately are over-designed, meaning that you'll have 2 transistors in parallel. They can do 2 kilowatts, but the amplifier won't generate more than 1 kilowatt, let's say. So there's plenty of room there for, minor mistakes. Obviously, if there's a storm, the antenna gets damaged and the operator doesn't pay attention to the SWR and keeps transmitting for, half an hour, then you'll see smoke. But generally, no. In Jarvis, we didn't have any failure on the amplifiers. But we were watching the SWR like crazy. That's your god there, Otherwise, amplifier will fail. The downside with the tube amplifiers, although they seem to be theoretically more reliable, they're very heavy, and also they're a lot more sensitive to voltage, swings. So they're very rarely used lately. In the expeditions, that is.
I think the protective circuits on the newer solid-state amps are much greater, much better too.
I just wanted to not ask a question, but give you just my take on the Fox and Hound operations on FT8, and that is, I'm a fairly little pistol out there, right? My antenna is just a vertical, and I got a high noise level. So, a lot of times, I see lots of people working, and I'm not decoding because by not pulling in a strong signal and then the noise level. And one thing I found that a lot of times the plus to super Fox mode is you can work multiple slots, and it doesn't matter whether it's one or the maximum, it's the same signal to noise ratio. And so that's a plus if you got a good signal coming out there. But if you're working regular Fox and Hound and you drop to just one slot sometimes that's the only time I decode, or maybe just 2 slots decoded. So there are times when I feel like if you were working regular Fox and Hound instead of Super Fox, I might make more contacts with some of the DXpeditions. So.
Well, if you're right at the edge of the signal readability, then yes, you're correct. Super Fox loses a little bit of the sensitivity compared to regular Fox and Hound. But the strategy generally for the expeditions, for the little pistols, is that, the DXpedition works the big guns in the first, 2 days, 3 days. And then after that, they're actually looking for customers. And towards the end of the DXpedition, it's when you have more chances to work the DXpedition if you're a small pistol. Towards the end of Jarvis, we were looking for, people to work, and there was nobody calling. Although the maximum theoretically possible of the Super Fox is 9 streams. You get 9 streams at the beginning, but as the expedition, continues working, you rarely fill up that many slots at the point.
And as we said, we went to straight WSJT. We didn't even do Fox Hound. We went straight up, and that brought in the very weak ones at the very end.
Yeah, right, because you're only running one slot. And also, I'm not sure about the decoding, but on the regular Fox and Hound or just regular FTA, you get AP decoding, and I'm not sure that happens when you're in Super Fox mode. That you get quite, because sometimes you get decodes that just sneak in there. And I'm not sure that happens with Super. Anyway, it's just an observation for you. Though.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, just real quick, Brian, Kilo Bravo 2 Sierra, just wanted to add on to that. There is one thing, having gone through and done quite a lot of analysis of this, is if you're used to working FT8 stations, the way that you actually work them, you can work them with radio settings that aren't optimal. You can have your AGC set incorrectly, you can have your gain set incorrectly, and you will still decode some things. But if you dial in your radio, you could work Super Fox and you couldn't even see them on the waterfall. I mean, I've got screenshots of them that you wouldn't even know they were there unless you were on station, tuned in, on frequency, and you were getting decodes that you wouldn't even be able to see. So there is a little bit of a difference in terms of the way that the operators, the hounds need to actually chase the fox. If you're waiting only to see the signal and some of these other things, you will miss them when they're actually there and you can work them. So it's not just the DXpedition changing the technology, but the hounds need to change a bit too. So.
There's some papers out there that describe, how to optimize receiving with your AGC settings and your RF gain. There's some very good papers out there how to optimize the receive.
Okay, is it drink time? Ned, do you want to wrap this up? Thank you all for coming. We hope you learned something. And I believe the ARRL will post all 8 of these sessions on somewhere, which will be announced.
Tomorrow, right?
It's already up.